Hi everybody, I'm Mike Westendorf, and welcome to Great Questions, Great Conversations, a podcast here of St. Paul's and the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin, where we are really kind of leaning into a number of different Christian topics. And I'm never quite sure where the conversations are going to go, but they are always edifying, they're always grace-filled. And we like to ask the hard questions, and we like to get some of the different perspectives that exist out there in terms of how we are challenged by the culture that we live in, or how do we share Jesus uniquely with people. And today, I have a special guest in Carol Kolosovsky, who is an author, a former teacher, and I think you're going to enjoy what we talk about here today, especially, and I would just have you lean in, if you've ever wondered whether or not you're qualified to do ministry, or if you ever get to a place where I'm 51 now, and sometimes in the back of my head, the enemy will whisper, well, your best ministry days are behind you, when in fact, some of your most influential days are actually into your 60s and 70s. And so God still has rich ministry planned for so many people. And my guest today is one of these people who inspires me, who is a little bit older than me, and yet God has been using her in some fantastic ways. And so I'd like to introduce you all, if you don't already know her, but author and former kindergarten teacher? First and second grade teacher, okay. But Carol Kolosovsky. Carol, welcome to Great Questions, Great Conversations.
Well, good morning, Mike. It's nice to be here, and how thoughtful of you to remind me that I'm aging.
My kids do this to me all the time, so at this point, I'm always grateful for people who are older than me, because it's like, I'm still a kid.
Yeah, and you don't feel it inside. You just don't. You're the same person always, but you're just a little bit in the know of what's appropriate to do.
Yeah,
but that's about it.
Heidi Shu, who you know, my assistant, she will say oftentimes, like, I'm just in this shell that happens to be, whatever my age is, but I don't feel like I'm that age. And the more I talk to a lot of older people who basically would say the same thing. And like you said, there's just a little more wisdom and experience that comes with
Hopefully we've learned our lessons. Sometimes we don't.
Yes.
But we try our best.
That's true. Yep, God came for all of our sins, even the ones in our older age. But Carol, I'm excited to have you here because we have been working on some of your projects that we're going to talk a little bit about here for a while. And as I mentioned before, your story, along with a few other people who I've had a chance to work with who are quite, Paul Kuntz, for example, I think is he 80 now? He wrote a song in his 70s, and he said, like, can you, here, maybe you can, sing this, and maybe you can record it. I was like, I'm not going to do it, you're going to do it. And he just looked at me like I was crazy. But we were able to do some things, and he recorded it, and it made such a difference in his church, and his community, and his family. So I've always loved those moments. So when we got hooked up to talk about the book, I was inspired, because again, one of my fears, just confession, is as I get older, will I still be useful? Will I still be respected? I'm a worship leader, in a church, or I do concerts, and are people going to still want me, an older guy, leading, in a younger generation? So those questions have started to come as now I'm into that middle-aged time of life.
And you can consider yourself typical, because I think everybody goes through that, especially when you retire. And I know my thought was, as I was sitting there, because I love teaching and I love sharing Jesus with the children and doing all these special things to let them feel the love of Jesus. But as I sat there at home, and the first thing I missed was recess, because I was used to going outside 3 times a day for fresh air. And all of a sudden I thought, I've got to get outside. This is ridiculous. And then I started to think about all those little people, those faces would come before my eyes, and my grandchildren, and I'm thinking now, did I really let them know Jesus is their Savior, their love? I really would like to teach them one more lesson. Because it's important to me, because I would always say to them at the end of the year, you don't have to remember my silly face. You don't have to even remember my name. But I want you to remember Jesus, the one I told you about. And I've met students since then saying, who are you? And that's perfectly fine. No, not really. They've always embraced you and are happy to see you. But at the same time, I prayed, Lord, if there's one more lesson to teach, give it to me. And so I had always done writing along the way. I wrote
as a hobby or something on the side?
Well, I wrote for Christlight.
Okay.
I took 3 years for that. I wrote for Wellspring magazine. I did the preschool devotions, the first, I think, 12 issues. So I was at the very first issue working with Ken Kramer, and that was exciting.
Yeah.
And then after I taught school for 37 years, but I had taught, 28, 29 years, and then I met my husband. And so that changes ministry too.
I can imagine.
And in a good way. It's a
yeah.
very supportive, encouraging thing, but yet you feel torn kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the first 2 years, our daughter was in high school. She was a tender age of 10 when she lost her mom. And so Dan wanted her to have a female influence for her last years in high school. And that was a really eye-opening thing, but yet at the same time, it was a blessing. And so during that time, Ken Kramer reached out to me again and asked me to write for what was now the Lutheran Parent.
Okay.
And these were the last issues of the Lutheran Parent when it was going to be discontinued, but it was with Bible pictures, which was exciting because he would give me an object, a mountain. Okay, I would like you to write about what the Bible has to say about mountains, and then you pull in all the historical lessons, and it was challenging but really fun.
Yeah.
And so then at the end when it was the last issue, I said, Ken, do you realize I worked on the first issue, now the last issue? And I said, are you sorry you asked me back that it ended up being a last issue? But so it was what it was. So I started as my first years of retirement. My friend, I don't know if you're familiar with Janie Neatfeld. She's written a lot of books. She's from Fond du Lac. We were college classmates at New Ulm, and we were both math concentrates.
So math concentrate over
math.
to writing.
And she had written books earlier for Northwestern Publishing House. And, I guess I don't know why I became a math concentrate, except that along the way my teachers always said math is good for you, and I enjoyed it. And when you're in college and we had to have concentrates, it was like, do I want to go into this area where I have to write another paper or just put a few numbers on the page? I needed a break from all the writing.
Sounds like a college kid right there.
Normal.
Yep.
But at any rate, when she retired in December, I retired in June, and she said, what are we going to do now? And I said, let's write. I said, I would like to do this. And so we'd get together once a month and share what we've been working on. And when I was teaching, I wrote some of the Christmas services and things like that, just for fun. And so one of the moms in my last school had come into my room one day after school, and she said, Carol, they have this Right to Publish conference down at Wheaton College. I think it's something you should do. And I said, I'm so busy. I can't do this. You have to take a product to evaluate.
Okay.
So then when Janie and I were starting to get together, I said, I think we should go to that. Yeah. And it was very eye-opening as to what the writing world is, the publishing world, and all that.
It is.
But at the same token, it was good for me. I was very intimidated by it all. And I thought I had taken a book, but I never published that one.
What gave you the courage to go and do that? I mean, like you said, I hear that, I see this, I hear this. The older you get, the idea of doing something new, especially if it's at all intimidating or outside our comfort zone, it seems as though you're even more likely not to do it the older you get.
I was just curious. I thought, is this something I could do or not? Along the way, I had done some writing. I thought, is it of value. But then I had the mindset also, well, if I want to do this for my grandkids and leave these messages for them and for my former students, well, I better find out what's it all about. And it doesn't hurt you to learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I learn it and I think that's not for me, fine. If I learn it, well, I'd sort of like to try. And it was encouraging going there. And what was nice is that they did an evaluation of your writing. And because it was a different background than Wells, that was very healthy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I felt like it was opportunity to witness, because they would say things to me and, how could you write this? And I would say, well, because they thought I was supposed to be writing for little people.
Okay.
And I was using big concepts like we do in Christ-like. We
Yeah.
teach them the important things. And the comment was, why little children can't handle that. And or this isn't,
Yeah.
or, and I just said to her, well, I don't want a God that fits in the size of my head or the size of one of my children's heads.
Yeah.
I know that God is much more than that. So if I'm not understanding it right now, that doesn't mean he's going to abandon me. It just means later on it's going to mean something to me.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
So, and then I said, are you evaluating my doctrine or are you evaluating my writing? Because this isn't about, paragraphs and, using terminology that's correct and things like that. So it was eye-opening. And another thing that happened at that conference was there was the president of this company out of Washington. She was well-known. She started the publication and everything. And before I went to speak to these people, I always looked up what the companies meant and what their mission statements were. Mm-hmm. And so when I read the one for her company, it had the Apostles' Creed as its mission statement, but it wasn't worded like what ours is, and it gave a different slant. And so when I went to speak with her, I said, well, you probably aren't going to be interested in my work because of your mission statement being contrary to mine. And she says, what are you talking about? And I said, well, the Apostles' Creed, when it says this, this, and this, she said, it says that? She was shocked, because evidently somebody else had put it up for her and she hadn't, she just assumed. And she said, I am going to take care of that today. And so she called the company and said, pull it down, we are going to work on it. And then they changed it. And so when I got back from conference, it was changed. So, I mean, it was...
Yeah, that's so cool.
Isn't it? So, so I guess there was reason I was supposed to be there too. But not only did I learn, but wherever you go, you can witness.
And I was going to say it validated what you're doing. I like how you, Lord, if I have one more story. I mean, that's something that for those of you if you're watching us, if you're listening online, I mean, that's for all of us who grow older, really at any stage. Lord, give me another. If there's one more lesson for me to share, if there's one more lesson for me to teach, and so here you are. You come to a conference to be able to learn, curious. So yes, it's intimidating, but the curiosity overcomes that, and then lo and behold, God gives you opportunities to witness, which is what your core is.
So, but I didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to do ministry. This is just the natural way you've been living all your life, how God has been guiding you and putting these things. And I would hate for anybody listening to this think they have to do something major. Right. Because I know of so many people that are doing ministry without being aware.
Yes.
I know several ladies that I always have a box of brownies mix or a cake mix in my cupboard, so whenever there's a funeral, I can do it. They're comforting people.
Yes.
And when I think of the examples of my older siblings, I came from a family of 8 kids.
Oh, okay.
And so you learn very fast that you are not the center of the universe.
No, amen.
And so, and all the things that they're doing, and they're so wonderful. And it's just such a blessing in so many ways.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I thank you for bringing that out too. ministry gets done in so many ways, so many anonymous ways. There's a lot of people who aren't looking for major attention. You weren't, when you started this project, and yet, I do think that whole idea for a time such as this, God brings people or brings projects, maybe even products, through people that need to get to the world and need to be known in a little bigger way. And so to see your book in this process of getting your first book published and the second one is on its way, that there's a next level. So that there's ministry that we can all do and be involved in. And it's amazing to me that sometimes God will then take that mixed with our personality and our experiences and the people around us to encourage something to lift and go just to a little higher awareness or a little bit of a larger reach, a platform,
So I can remember after this book came out, Pastor Borkwart, he was my professor at MLC. What did I have him for? Speech class. Huh. And the very first speech I gave about this book was at Stony Creek, and there sat Professor Borkwart.
Oh, seriously?
And so then at the very end, he raised his hand and he said, "And Carol, I just want you to know you finally passed the class." It only took me how many years?
That's good.
But yeah, it's interesting how things come full circle.
Yeah.
But
well, let's talk a little bit about the origins of the book. And so we've come through. You're retired. You've taken this conference. There's some additional inspiration. There's some learning.
Okay.
There's some.
All right.
How did we go from some of those and the writing experiences that you had? That one more lesson. If there's one more lesson for me to teach, how did we go from there to Little Lamb Gabe?
It's all God led. It's like I said. It's not like I woke up one morning, but when I got done with the conference and I had these things here, then that summer I kept praying, "Lord, if you want me to write this, give me an idea of what you would like me to do." And so we were at home in Door County visiting my siblings, and I was staying at my sister's house. And the night I had this vision of, it was Jesus' nail-scarred hands reaching down to this spotted lamb. And that picture's in here. Where is it? Where is it? There it is. At the beginning of the story. Okay. And so I thought, that's it. That's what I'm going to be doing. So I got up the next morning. I went into the kitchen by my sister, and I said, "I'm going to write a book." And she's my oldest sister. I've always looked up to her, and she looked at me and said, "Really?" So encouraging.
Yes.
And I said, "And Char, if I do get this book written, I'm going to dedicate it to your bed." Because that's where the idea came. And she says, "Well, I hope it doesn't get written." So, oh, well, that's the way it goes. But then when we were on our way back home from Door County, I sat in the car with a notebook and started scribbling all these ideas that were coming as possibilities of what could happen. And so then it was like, okay, now we work. It's time to work. And so you set the time aside and you start doing it. And you get to experience the most delicious agony ever.
I'm going to write that one down. Delicious agony. Tell me about that.
Okay. Because it's such a joy, because I really don't consider myself a writer.
Yeah.
I consider myself somebody that gets to read something nobody else has read yet. And so it's sort of exciting to, write those things down and get the ideas. And it's like Janie said too, it's like, where do those thoughts come from? Yeah. It's just amazing. God just leads you. And it was just fine. But it's an agony trying to get it into a form that is God-pleasing, to that other people will actually understand the thoughts that are in your head. Because when I taught my primary people, when we talk about communication, I would always say, you want to take something from your head and put it into somebody else's head, and you can communicate it in so many different ways, with body language, whatever. And so it's like, when you're trying to do it in the written form, then there's rules to follow, commas, and all this stuff to do. And so that can, or the thought doesn't come. And what I always found out was that if I didn't have the thought that day, and I'd walk away and thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm not supposed to do this, then a couple weeks later I would have a situation and I'd realize, oh, that wasn't the only way that could be understood. And it was something I needed to learn yet to put it into the book. I hadn't been taught that. Or I'll go to church and the sermon will have these words and I'll think, oh, I wish I would have heard this while I was teaching. I would have shared that with my students. And then I think, yeah, but I can put it in my book.
Right.
So it's a combination of things.
It's interesting to hear you speak about those things. As a songwriter, I've found a very similar thing. I like the way you said that. I'm reading something nobody else has read yet. I've never considered myself a songwriter the way that, some people, I'm sure it's the same in your world, people are just writing, like they write journals. They're just writing every single day as exercises. There's songwriters who write one song a day or 2 songs a day, and I've just never been able to operate that way. And every time I've sat down to try to force myself to write about a topic, nothing happens. It's just agony. And then, like you said, all of a sudden, so the song, All That Remains, I had been encouraged to write that for our Because It Matters campaign and for this whole, vision.
The pressure of it.
Yeah, so it was sitting there, and Pastor Pete and I, one day we were sitting down for about a half hour, and I said, I'm stuck on this. I'm trying to move it this way. Here's the Bible passage, it's a theme. And we got to talking, and within a half hour, he got the discipleship ladder picture. We had talked through that, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is really important for us to have. And the song, like within a half hour. But everything leading, like literally months leading up to that, I was just stuck. And then all of a sudden, you hear the right thing at the right time, God puts it there, and it's like, now you can move forward. So it's interesting to hear you talk about
God knows what He's doing. We don't have to doubt that ever. And like I said, it's all God-led, that this ended up even being a book. Because once I had the manuscript written, how do you go from there to getting a book? And so, first of all, I went to Northwestern Publishing House. And I had done some of their workshops and worked with John Brown, and he was the head person. And I said to him, "I've got this book. Would you even consider?" And he says, "Well, no, because we don't publish children's books because they're too expensive with the pictures and everything, and they always have to write for grants to get one, and they hadn't done that, so there would be no way." And so then I reached out to Concordia. And they were very, very receptive, appreciated it. I gave it to them, and the first time they said, well, it's the end of the year, the timing is wrong, our budget is all used up. So then I reached out the next year so that it would be within budget time. And they, considered it. And then at the end, they came back and said, no, thank you, because you have talking animals. And we don't promote that kind of thing. And, I said, that's fine. You have to have a standard. And I don't want to publish with somebody that doesn't have a standard as to how they want to project God's Word. When you're dealing with God's Word, you should have standards. And so then it was like, now what do I do? So then, because of that conference, I knew about self-publishing. And I had no idea really how much work was involved. But then how do they warned you about some publishers out there that won't, deliver on what you asked them to do. So I thought, well, how am I going to figure this out? And I happened to get the book by Rebecca Wendland, and she had Bloom Where You're Planted. And she was in Africa when she wrote that. And so I thought if she could publish from Africa with this publishing company, maybe I could. And it was a Zulan Christian publication. And when I had talked to her after she came back from Africa, she said how Ernest Wendland had also used that company. So I thought, well, it's worth a try. And after I investigated, then I found out that they really do want to get the word out. They are a huge publishing company, so you have to, do your work. But they will give churches a 30% discount if they order books directly from them, if there's multiple copies, so the book can be used for outreach.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's a perk that I would like for my people, if they would want to do that, because churches have used it in that way. So I ended up doing self-publishing. So, and everything is a learning experience. And anything that could go wrong with publishing a book happened with this book. Yeah. Usually it's supposed to be like 6 weeks to 8 weeks, 18 months.
Oh.
But it was because the illustrations are watercolors, beautiful watercolors, and all that. So, but it was interesting. But how did it end up being this? Okay, I investigated. I found out how much money it costs to do this. And I thought, well, every author thinks they've written something for everybody, but it's really not the case. You're blinded because it's your little project. And I thought, Ken Kramer is a very good editor, and he can be ruthless, and it would be dripping in red pen ink, and so he would be honest with me, because I thought, well, if this is just something that I should be making for my grandkids, because that's my audience that I started with, that is, where maybe I should just, do stick figures and go to Kinko's, run it off, give it to them for Christmas, because I've done that with other things. And so, but before I put it on the shelf like that, I will run it past his eyes and see what he says. And so he read it, his wife read it, and granted, that was with no pictures, just words. And he reached out to me and he said, Carol, this book is not just for your grandchildren. They're for other people's grandchildren too. And I would love to edit it. Wow. Would you let me? Wow. And I thought, oh my gracious. So, okay, now we've got the author, we've got an editor. Now how do we get this illustrated? Because I tried to illustrate it on my own and it did not work. I have so much respect. I have so much respect for people that are able to do that. And so by word of mouth, different people were telling me of students or some of my former students I reached out to. And the one lady that had been asking Janie to illustrate her books, Janie said, why don't you ask her? She's a willing spirit. So I did. She was too busy. She said, but I happen to know my friend just retired from teaching, and she's looking for a project. So I reached out to her also. So I gave everybody, the manuscript, and I asked for them to do one picture, and the picture I asked for was the picture of Jesus kissing the lamb, because I thought if they can do this, then it would be. And then I also asked them to just imagine a picture from reading in any story what they'd like to do. And it was amazing the things that came back, but this just jumped out. When Dan and I saw that, it was like, oh my gracious, because it's so tender and so loving. And I had not met Rachel. She was in Minnesota. Her husband's a professor at New Ulm and at MLC. And Ken said too, yes, this is the illustrator. So God put us together in this little team, and I said yes. And now I'm not publishing a book by myself.
Yeah, right.
So it gave, well, of course I knew God would be at our side blessing us. And we always prayed every time we had a virtual You know, that Lord, guide us to do what you want us to do, make it God-pleasing for you and its truth. And that the Spirit will be able to touch the hearts of the people that read it.
Yeah.
So, so we worked virtually all this time, and it took lots of weeks. To tell you the truth, it all in 5 years to get this book. But this was book 1, 2020. Mm-hmm. It's now 2025, 5 years later.
Yep.
And I told Rachel, there's 2 more coming, so plan on living another 10 years for sure, if not to 100, because I have a lot of ideas. But so we will see. But God, put it all together, and it was just all God-led. And then after the book was published, all the doors God opened up were amazing. Things that I never imagined.
So let's, I want to, with the time that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about, some of the doors that opened, just a little bit about the next project that's going to be coming, the book number 2. But I really do want to turn the conversation just a little bit more toward when if you're a listener, because I'm curious, how old were you when you started this book?
Ooh, let's see. That was, I can't remember how old I am. About 8. I must have been about 66.
Yeah, okay. And
Something like
so
that.
about
very young.
Yeah, very young to start that process, right? And again, this is one of those things. I mean, there's probably 2 angles that we could probably go on. In fact, let's park here for just a little bit. We'll come back to the open doors, and we'll finish with the next step. There are listeners who would be sitting in and saying, I couldn't do that. I've had dreams, but I just can't. Or just the doors never seem to open. Or I'm waiting for the partner, like I'm waiting for all of the other people to come and save my idea. I know I've sometimes played that card a little bit, like, well, if only somebody else would come in and partner with me, so I'm just not going to do anything. There are people who have dreams and are wondering what to do with them at all ages. Mm-hmm. First, talk maybe a little bit to the younger person who just doesn't seem to have time. It's not the season. They're a parent. They're raising kids, and they've got dreams, but it seems like these dreams are never going to happen. What advice would you give somebody in their 30s, maybe 40s, who are just thinking, I had this dream of doing something like this, or whatever their dream is, but it's just not happening?
Oh, dear. Because you're so busy with life.
Yeah.
Doing all the things that have to be done to put food on the table and take care of your children.
Right.
And those are very honorable things to be doing. Mm-hmm. And never second guess yourself that I should be better. But I guess I always thought inside that if God wants me to do this, He's going to give me opportunity, and His timing is perfect. Mm. And so, I explained to my one niece who, because I was single until I didn't get married into my 50s, and when she was just 30, she was saying, "What do you do, Aunt Carol, that you're not married?" And I just wrote to her. I said, every day when you wake up, you have your plate before you of what you're supposed to eat that day. And God's put the stuff on the plate. Mm. And so you eat what God gives you for the day. And so if that means a spouse, it's going to be there. Yeah. But if it's not, you don't say, I'm going to go hungry today. God's still providing for me today.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's an interesting picture. Yeah, I'm gonna eat what what God's put in front of me to eat today.
So so I had in my mind I would like to do some writing, but okay, I wrote for my students. I did those things, and I just had that sureness that when the time was right, it would be on the plate. Mm. And you don't become discontent with the day. Use the day for what God has given it to you to do. And then I also had the philosophy that sure, I have in my mind that this is what I want to do and teach, but I hadn't learned it yet. But I didn't know it, you know? And so as you go on and experiencing other things, and you think, oh, that's why I needed to learn this valuable lesson. Maybe in humility. And, you know, when you teach primary kids, it gets to be really eye-opening. So I wrote a play for my students to do for the PTO. And I handed it all out. And the first thing, this little girl raises her hand and she goes, "This isn't a very good play." That was the first comment, my first play that I ever wrote. And I thought, oh my gracious, maybe I shouldn't have tried this. And I said, well, why not? She has more lines to say than I do. So then whenever I wrote things for my classroom, I always made sure everything was totally equal, you know, because they don't look at it that way.
Yeah.
But, you know, and it was like, okay, you needed that knock between the eyes, because I was so, oh yeah, here I did this wonderful thing. Well, it's not wonderful in everybody's eyes.
Yeah, and depending on what the audience that you're trying to reach, that really is, you can't care so much about what all of the other audiences might say about it. But if this is the audience I'm trying to reach, then this is the plate that I've been given to work with. It's interesting. I love that. When the time was right, it would be on the plate. That's something I will take out of that, because I've oftentimes, and you know me a little bit. I'm a starter. I see ideas that are possible.
And you make them happen. This would not have gone as far without you, Mike. You have no idea. Making that book trailer for me, and then now with the new book coming up with the song being in there.
We've got a music video. If you haven't seen it yet, it's so good.
Oh, he's done.
I made Carol sing on it, which was so awesome, by the way.
That was...
that was fun.
You probably did not see it, but the very first time that we sang through, I cried through the whole thing. I did, and Dan was crying too. And what was very special is that when I shared it with a loved one, they wrote back to me and said, "You may have cried the first time you sang it, but I cry every time I hear it because it just touches me so." And so, all the things that you've done for me. And God has placed all these kind of people in my life, and I have treasured it. And He is going to equip you. He is going to surround you with the people that will support you, you know, whether it is saying, this isn't a good play, or it's, you know, somebody saying, yes, go ahead and do it. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. As somebody who struggles with feeling like, even though I'm doing all these things, that it's still not enough, because there's still so many other things that are out there, and the plate isn't big enough, you know, and so it's not on my plate. But I'm like, but we should look at all the other things.
Well, then say thank you for the ideas, jot them down, and then another day maybe it'll be added to your plate, so you don't forget it.
Yeah. So thank you for the ideas. I hope you guys are writing these things down, because that's what I'm doing. I'm taking notes because this is so good. Because because one day it may be on the plate.
Or God has somebody else in mind for doing that particular thing, and you have to be willing to share.
Yes.
So
it's so good. Let me pose the other question, and because this is the one that it is becoming more personal, you know, for me. Like I said at the beginning, that my dad went to heaven last year, and it was interesting, you know, all the way up until probably a month before he died, when we were realizing that we probably were coming to the end of it. In fact, doctors were kind of trying to tell us that. But he was still dreaming of, you know, if I can serve my family in some way, then I'm going to fight to have an opportunity to serve my family in some way. And of course, as we get older, it feels like our world shrinks. You know, you read Ecclesiastes, you know, and Solomon's writing as we get older toward the end of it. And I mean, his greatest advice is, man, if God's given you the ability to enjoy your work, i.e. enjoy your plate, if He's given you a spouse to love, like, and you know, God, this is the best that life gets on this side of heaven. Yeah. That is the best it gets. It doesn't matter the riches and all the stuff you have and all the things you do, because that older age is coming when all you will be able to look at that is good is the things above the sun. It's God, and that's where our eyes and focus go as God allows these things to kind of get shifted off. But until that time, there is a stereotype that exists when you're younger, because we're making fun of when we're younger, we're making fun of those old people who drive so slow or are so cautious or blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden one day we become those people, and yet we still have dreams, and God has put in us a desire to make a difference and to have a relationship. Mm-hmm. So the question, Carol, I want to ask you is just for those who have, or maybe are in a season who are older, let's say you're 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and are just feeling a little bit discouraged. What has God been teaching you about ministering to others, living life on purpose as an older adult? Especially to those people who've been maybe just discouraged, like I could never do what Carol is doing.
No, but they're doing things that I wish I could do. Being able, some of them are the most wonderful grandparents that you would ever want to meet. Mm-hmm. And I love my grandchildren, and I reach out to them and do, as much as I can. But in this busy society, things have turned. When I was young, the time was spent going to grandma and grandpa's, going and helping them, doing these things for them. Now the time has changed. All the things of the world have taken over their time. And so grandma and grandpa, if you want to be involved in your children's lives, you have to go and sit on the bleacher. You have to go and do these things. And you were just describing how it's, not easy for them to do that.
Yeah.
And I just pray that, they're valuable things they're doing. I'm not trying to criticize that in any way. Mm-hmm. But there has to be a balance. Mm-hmm. And I'm just praying that these young children that have always been playing and being watched and the center of attention, are they learning about how they're going to take care of their mom and dad when they're at that age? Mm. Because if they're not doing the example for them, are our children going to be lonely too?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that probably didn't answer your question. I'm sorry.
That's why I love these conversations, because we can take them in a number of different ways. The notion of being older, mm-hmm. and is different.
It's a stigma, and it used to be wiser, but not necessarily so. And I think part of it is with technology, it's very easy to get left behind because it advances so fast, and the elderly people don't advance with it as much. Yeah. And so you do. I'm a dinosaur in lots of ways. I've done things because I've had to learn them to do that. But if you don't, the average person doesn't need to know how to put a graphic on,
how to do
thing.
Facebook and Instagram
those kinds of things. And so I don't want them to become isolated. I don't want to be isolated.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
But.
So for you've said a couple of things. Summarize it maybe just a little bit for especially for us as older adults. What are the things that you have found valuable to keep that voice in your head that you're not enough? That you could be doing more, or that I have dreams, but they're never going to be realized. What advice do you have for people in your experience has been helpful for you when you've had to wrestle with some of that?
It all comes back to reading God's Word every day. And what's the joy of retirement is you don't have to stop and run off to the job. You can read on and on until you're filled for the day. And that is such a blessing. And then I am blessed with a spouse that knows God's Word very, very well. So anytime I need to ask a question, he's there. And we talk about the things, or we read. Right now, we've just finished the book. It's just devotions on Luther's Catechism by yeah, I can't remember the name of the guy, Westendorf, I think it was. That's your name. I can't think.
I was going to say, I wonder if my Uncle Rolf
No.
would something on that.
No, I can't. I'm sorry.
No,
The
that's all
name
right.
escaped me. But it's just simple things like that. And while researching about sheep and lambs, I have read some very good books by Philip Keller. And it's so eye-opening because he has the spiritual aspect as well as the practical things of being a shepherd and taking care of sheep. And as you learn about these things, it just makes you aware of how it's so us, so people. And what God did in putting that in the Bible is just unbelievable, and it's so rich. And I've used it in so many different ways. Even before I started writing this book, I didn't realize I had such background in sheep. But it's been, fun. It's my last year of teaching. One of the things I did that year was wrote a devotion for every week for the families, but I would put it in a special packet at the beginning of each quarter, and I'd have a pastor come in and introduce it to them. And there was not only the devotion, but there was an activity to do and all sorts of special things at home. And when I met with the parents at the beginning of the year, I would always have a parent meeting with them. And I gave them, somebody gifted money so that I could give them that book by Philip Keller, the first one about a shepherd looks at the 23rd Psalm.
Yeah.
And he said that's what I was basing some of the devotion off. And I said, you as parents, to be prepared, you can read this book so that you'll be able to make the devotion a little bit more rich. And several of the parents said, oh, thank you for this. This is really nice. But, it all, again, is that time factor. And some of the kids would bring in the projects that they made, and some of them wouldn't.
Yeah.
But, or they never got to do it.
Yeah.
But that's aside from the point. But that was where I was learning about sheep and loving it. In fact, for my retirement celebration, the whole gymnasium was decorated with sheep. So
I think God was giving you a theme to work with at this point.
I think so, but I didn't realize it.
We're going to wrap up time now because our time of plate of time is more. Yes, exactly. So we'll have to have you back, and we'll do another one.
That.
Let's talk just briefly about a couple doors opened up. So we've got languages that opened up, and then it opened up into the next book. So I'd like to talk just about those two things before we close out.
All right. Let's see. As I looked back, this book took place in the spring, and it's like, okay, this is how you begin your life. And the other book that I had worked on to take to that conference was about the cycle of life and all the stages. And so I thought, well, now we can do the stages of life. So book number 2 is taking place in the summer when Jesus guides them to the summer pastures up on the mountains. And the things that they learn as they go along, one, they get to see how richly the shepherd takes care of them and goes to all lengths to make sure they have food, they have water, and they are safe. And then they also discover who they are. In the book 1, they became Jesus' little lambs, how they became his lamb, and what a blessing that is. But now it's more in this day and age where people are saying and questioning, who am I and what am I,
right.
or all that kind of things, and what's my purpose for life. And so those questions, are answered, and I don't know if I should tell you this, but do you want the answer to the question?
Do you want the answer to the question?
Who are you?
All right, we'll take the answer to the question.
I am Jesus' little lamb.
There's a song about that.
Yes, there's a song about that. And there is, that's the, I am Jesus' little lamb is the inspiration for all the writing. Yeah. When I was a little girl, I was taught that in Sunday school. I went to public school. There was no Christian day schools around. And I remember on the ride home on the bus, I'd be singing, I am Jesus' little lamb. It gave me such comfort.
That's cool to think that a seed planted in Sunday school when you were a little girl grows up you're a writer, you have experiences and whatnot, but then at the age of 66, you begin to write this book. And the 5 years later or whatever, it comes to actually be that God's planting a seed from way back, I am Jesus' little lamb, and allowing it to live through you all this time and then start to come out in a series of books. That's incredible.
I would love to share another reason why I am Jesus' little lamb is so meaningful to me.
Sure.
In the beginning of my teaching, I had a little girl, her name was Anita, and she loved I Am Jesus' Little Lamb that I had taught to her. In fact, when the parents came in for the first conference, they said, "Thank you for teaching her that song. Now we know where she is. We always hear her singing it. If she's in the bedroom or if she's on the swings, she's singing I Am Jesus' Little Lamb." Well, after the 2 years were over, at the beginning of the next year, little Anita was in an accident, and I won't go into details, but she passed away. And Pastor came to me and said, "We want the children to sing for the funeral." And, and he picked out this funeral song, which had wonderful words. I'm not saying it wasn't a good song, but my little people don't know those words. They don't know the melody. And I said, would it be okay if we sing I Am Jesus' Little Lamb instead? And so here, I'm directing the song with tears in my eyes at the funeral. But it also focused me that this is why I'm teaching. This is, if I'm not getting the thought, I am Jesus' little lamb, across to my students, then why should I be in this classroom?
Wow.
So that's another reason why. So, and that's
beautiful.
God put all those things in our place. So now book number 2 will be in summer. Book number 3 is autumn, when they return to the valley. And that's where they're going to be picking a mate. Mm-hmm. And then book number 4 is as they approach the end times, the death and everything, but also the new life begins. Yeah. So I'm very excited, and I've been working on 3 and 4. I can hardly wait to do some of the research just to see how it all falls together. Yeah. And what was really interesting, I had given book number 2 to one of the professors at MLC to read, and he wrote back and said, "What happened to the cross on Gabe's head?" And I had, purposely not put it there, because in the first book I said, when you look into the pond of living water, that's when you see your cross. And they were nowhere near that, but they could see it, but not that they could see their reflection. Right. And so I said, thank you for that, because it's all going to be explained in book number 3.
There we go.
So wait for book number 3.
Okay. So. Well, we're going to take a pause here, and we'll look forward to letting book number 2 come out. And when that comes out, we'll sit down again and we'll find out more about how your progress is on this whole series of books in this story.
And what I would love to share is avenues that God has used this book that I never imagined. Yeah. And it just, it just amazes me that he is using it in such different ways. Yeah. So, because to me, it's not a children's book; it's an everybody book.
Very much so. So. And like you said, for all of us, who am I to be able to sit with, no matter how old you are, I am Jesus' little lamb. Oh, I can't imagine not being his lamb. Yeah.
And
that's what we want for everybody to know. This is simplicity of what does that mean? And then to have resources that can kind of help guide you through it a little bit. That's a very cool thing that God's doing through you and the people that he's assembled around you.
Right. Like I shared with you that one time that Samuel Morris, who did that phenomenal thing of doing the Morse code, and the, leaps and bounds for communication. And he did not feel like he was an inventor even. Yeah. And the first message he typed on the telegraph was, "What God hath wrought." It's what God has done. And like I said, this has all been God-led. Yeah. And he's the one that's going to take it into the future where he wants it to be. Yeah. And we are just privileged and blessed to be his little lambs and to try our best for him. That doesn't mean we do it perfectly. Doesn't mean we do it on time. And I procrastinate. Maybe that's why it takes 5 years. But at the same time, he's the one that blesses it. And we are very grateful.
That's awesome. Carol, thanks for joining us here on Great Questions, Great Conversations.
It's been fun. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
But have mouth, we'll talk.
That sounds good. Well, we'll have your mouth back and we'll talk some more then.
Okay, that sounds
I
like.
agree with
And
you.
we truly appreciate what you do, Mike. And listening to these podcasts, I've really appreciated them in the past, and so I feel very honored to be here.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome.
you.
Thank you for joining us. And so for all of you listening in or watching in, thanks for joining us on this one. We will have Carol back another time. We'll let the next book come out, and we'll talk a little bit more of Carol's adventures with Gabe and where God is leading. So I hope that this has been a beneficial conversation for you, and it's given you some things to think about. I know for me that thought was when the time was right, it would be on the plate, and I hope that there's a few more things that you have taken away and would be encouraged by, no matter where you are on your journey. Again, my name is Mike Westendorf. You are listening to Great Questions, Great Conversations, a Christian podcast of St. Paul's in the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin. And we will see you again next time.